Imagine this. You're 26 years old. 3 days ago, you watched your husband die defending your city walls against Spartan warriors. Now you're standing in the ruins of your home, holding your 3 children close, trying to make yourself invisible as Spartan officers walk among the surviving women, examining you like livestock at a market. An officer approaches. He asks your age, whether the children are yours. You answer, your voice barely a whisper. He makes a mark on his wax tablet and moves on without explanation. That evening, soldiers tear your children from your arms. Your 3-year-old son screams for you, trying to run after you as you're marched away with 200 other women. You look back, trying to memorize their faces, having no idea if you'll ever see them again. This is where your nightmare begins, and compared to what's coming, death would have been mercy. This is Crown and Dagger, where we explore the darkest chapters of history that others won't touch. What you're about to learn will change how you understand ancient warfare and why the wives of defeated warriors faced fates that ancient sources called worse than death. Hit subscribe and smash that like button right now, because this story needs to be told. To understand what happened to these women, you need to understand what Sparta actually was. While Athens built democracy and traded culture across the Mediterranean, committing its own atrocities behind that civilized mask, Sparta was brutally honest about what it was: a war machine. Boys taken at age 7, trained in the agoge, pain, obedience, violence, weak infants left to die, individual identity crushed. You were Spartan first, human second. But here's the foundation of it all. The Helots, a massive enslaved population, 10 Helots for every Spartan. They worked the land while Spartans perfected warfare. The Spartans lived in constant terror of them, outnumbered 10 to 1. One rebellion away from annihilation. This fear drove everything they did, and Sparta understood something other Greeks didn't fully grasp. To destroy an enemy forever, killing warriors isn't enough. You target their women, control reproduction, erase identity. Make the next generation serve you instead of seeking revenge. When Sparta conquered a city, this wasn't random violence. This was systematic. Commanders assessed captured women like inventory, age, fertility, status, then sorted them into categories based on how they'd be used. Field slaves, domestic servants, and for the youngest, healthiest women. Something historians like Plutarch described with words suggesting it was worse than death itself. Now let me tell you exactly what that meant. Here's what most people don't understand about ancient warfare. The battle was just the beginning. The real conquest happened afterward, in how you dealt with the survivors. Kill all the men? You've eliminated one generation of warriors, but their sons, raised by their mothers, would grow up seeking revenge. The culture survives. The grievance festers. In 20 years, you're fighting the same war again. Sparta figured out the solution. You don't just conquer territory, you conquer bloodlines. When Spartan forces took a city, the surviving population was immediately divided. Military-age men were either dead or being marched to execution. Boys and elderly were separated, and the women, specifically women of childbearing age, roughly 15 to 40, they received special attention. These women represented both a threat and an opportunity. Left alone, they'd raise the next generation of enemies. But controlled properly, they could be absorbed, their children could become Spartans, or at least serve Spartan interests. The conquered culture could be erased not through genocide, but through systematic reproductive control. The assessment process was methodical. Spartan officers examined each woman. How old? Any children? What was her status in the conquered city? Wife of a warrior? Daughter of a leader? A priestess? Each detail determined her fate. The women were then categorized. Some would join the Helot masses, disappearing into fields and workshops. Others had different destinies. And for women from the ruling class, wives and daughters of the enemy's leaders, Sparta had specific plans. Because humiliating the enemy's elite women wasn't just cruelty. It was strategic messaging. It told every Greek city watching, this is what happens when you resist us, not just to your men, to your women, to your bloodline, to everything you are. The wives and daughters of defeated nobles were valuable, not as labourers. Sparta had helots for that. They were valuable as symbols, as living demonstrations of total conquest. These women would be assigned as wives to Spartan citizens, not by choice, not through negotiation, by state decree, older Spartan men who needed wives, warriors whose previous wives had died, men who hadn't produced enough children for the state. The assignments were practical, serving Sparta's need to maintain its citizen population, but they were also psychological warfare. Picture this: your husband was a city leader, a respected warrior. 3 weeks ago he commanded men in battle. Now he's dead, killed by Spartans, and you're standing in a ceremony, dressed in wedding garments, being formally married to one of the men who destroyed your world. These weren't secret arrangements, they were public. Everyone present knew exactly what this was. Conquest dressed as marriage. You'd speak the ritual words, play the role of a willing bride, while every person watching understood you were a captive whose real husband was probably rotting in a mass grave. After the ceremony, you'd be taken to your new husband's household. There you'd be expected to fulfill every duty of a Spartan wife, managing the home, bearing children, raising those children as Spartans, teaching them Spartan values, watching them grow up to potentially fight against any survivors from your original city. The children you bore would be considered Spartan citizens, but they'd always carry the knowledge of their mother's origin. Some grew up never learning about their maternal heritage. Others knew but couldn't act on it. All of them existed as living proof that Sparta could take even the highest-ranking women and make them serve the state that had destroyed their families. For the women, this was described by ancient sources as worse than death because it required active participation in destroying your own culture. You couldn't just endure, you had to perform, smile, manage a household, love children who were both yours and products of your captivity. Some women adapted, found ways to survive psychologically, others never did. Ancient accounts mention women who lived their entire lives in silent grief, who refused to fully participate even when it brought punishment, who taught their children small rebellions in secret, and some chose death. Plutarch describes captured noble women throwing themselves from cliffs rather than accept forced marriage to their conquerors. These deaths were sometimes portrayed as virtuous, women preserving their honor through suicide. But the fact that such choices were necessary reveals the horror of the system. Now we get into something even darker, because forced marriage to citizens wasn't the only fate awaiting captured women. Sparta's ideology emphasized producing strong warriors. They practiced selective breeding in their own population, and they extended this thinking to conquered peoples. Some captured women, particularly those from populations Spartans considered to have desirable traits, height, strength, specific physical characteristics, were assigned not as wives but as what sources obliquely call breeding partners. These weren't marriages. These were reproductive assignments. Women paired with Spartan men specifically to produce children with mixed heritage but Spartan loyalty. Or paired with helots to produce offspring born into slavery but with characteristics valuable for specific labor. The arrangements treated both women and sometimes men as breeding stock, value determined entirely by potential offspring. The women had no legal protection, no status, no ability to refuse. Children born from these unions occupied complicated positions. Some might be considered citizens, but always carried the taint of mixed heritage. Others were born helots, inheriting their mother's subjugated status, growing up knowing they were products of conquest. For the mothers, this created profound psychological conflict. The children were theirs. Maternal attachment is powerful. But they were also products of arrangements the mothers never chose. growing up to serve the people who had destroyed everything. This wasn't random violence. This was state policy. The targeting of women for reproductive purposes was as carefully planned as military campaigns. The results? Children who would serve Spartan interests were intended outcomes supporting Sparta's long-term dominance. Most captured women faced a simpler but no less brutal fate. They became Helots. The Helot system was the foundation of Spartan power. State-owned slaves who worked the land, produced goods, did everything that allowed Spartan citizens to focus entirely on warfare. Helot status was hereditary. Born a Helot, die a Helot. Your children, grandchildren, all future generations, enslaved forever. Captured women absorbed into this system faced lives of grinding labor, working Spartan fields during planting and harvest, serving in households, producing goods in workshops. The work was endless, the conditions brutal, the treatment deliberately cruel. Helots were regularly beaten to reinforce their status, given minimal food and clothing, forbidden from aspiring to anything beyond assigned labor. They existed to serve, and Sparta made sure they never forgot it. But female Helots faced additional vulnerabilities. They were sexually available to Spartan citizens without consequence. A Spartan could force himself on a Helot woman and face no punishment. She was property. Children born from these violations became Helots, adding to the enslaved population. Some Helot women spent decades in Spartan households, serving as domestics, wet nurses for Spartan children, available for whatever their masters demanded. They'd watch Spartan children grow up privileged, while their own children labored in fields, never able to leave, never able to refuse anything. The psychological weight was crushing. These women remembered freedom. They'd had identities, social positions, families, futures. Now they were property. Their children born into permanent servitude. They lived surrounded by multi-generational Helot families and saw their own future. Not just their enslavement, but their children's and grandchildren's extending forever. Women who had been captured from conquered cities, who remembered being free, faced particular anguish. The contrast between what was and what would always be created a psychological burden that defined every moment of their existence. Sparta maintained the Helot system through systematic terror, and nothing embodied that terror more than the Krypteia. This was a rite of passage for young Spartan men. They'd be sent into the countryside with weapons and a simple mission: hunt and kill Helots who seemed dangerous. Strong ones, bold ones, anyone showing signs of potential leadership. Young Spartans would stalk Helots like prey, wait for the right moment, strike without warning. The targets were unarmed, defenseless. That was the point. Helot women were sometimes targets if they were seen as troublemakers, or if they simply happened to be in the wrong place. The Krypteia didn't need justification. Any Helot could be killed at any time for any reason. The practice served multiple purposes. It gave young Spartans experience in killing without remorse. It terrorized the Helot population by demonstrating that death could come at any moment. It eliminated potential resistance leaders before they could organize anything. For Helot women, particularly those who remembered freedom, the Krypteia was a constant shadow. You learned to make yourself invisible, suppress any quality that might be interpreted as dangerous. Teach your children to do the same. Show too much spirit, too much capability, and you might not live through the next harvest season. This was life under Spartan rule. Not just labor and servitude, but the knowledge that you could be murdered by a teenage boy as part of his training, and no one would care. Your life had no value, except as a lesson for young warriors learning to kill. Sparta didn't just conquer populations, they humiliated them, publicly, systematically. When Sparta won major victories, the celebrations included rituals designed to demonstrate total domination, and captured women were the centerpieces of these displays. Women from defeated cities would be paraded through Spartan territory, displayed as living trophies. If they'd been prominent in their original cities, wives of leaders, priestesses, women of status, their fall would be made as visible as possible. They'd be stripped of whatever noble dress they wore and dressed as servants, then marched through Spartan streets while citizens watched and jeered. Here's what made it particularly cruel. Spartan women participated. Women who themselves had more freedom than most Greek women, who took pride in producing Sparta's warriors, would mock the captives, shout insults about their weakness, their failure to produce warriors strong enough to defend their cities. This gendered aspect was devastating. The captured women weren't just being humiliated by their conquerors, they were being mocked by other women. Their shared gender provided no solidarity, only another vector for degradation. These public displays weren't just entertainment, they were strategic messaging. Other Greek cities would hear what happened to women from cities that resisted Sparta. The stories would spread. Resist us, and your wives and daughters face public degradation beyond just defeat. The rituals also reinforced Spartan identity. Spartan men were strong conquerors. Other men were weak and defeated. Spartan women were proud participants in military culture. Other women were captives and servants. By participating in these humiliation rituals, Spartans reinforced their sense of superiority and commitment to the system that gave them dominance. Let me give you concrete examples. Real cities, real people, real consequences. The Messenian Wars, 8th and 7th centuries BCE. Sparta conquered Mantinea, territory west of Sparta, in conflicts lasting decades. When it ended, the entire Messenian population was enslaved. Messenian women became Helots, their children born into permanent servitude. These weren't foreigners, they were Greeks, culturally similar to Spartans. But after conquest, they were reduced to state property. For generations, Helots of Messenian descent remembered their people's free existence. This created constant potential for resistance. Sparta dealt with it through the Krypteia and brutal suppression of any uprising. Messenian women raised children in slavery while teaching them about their heritage in secret. Some families maintained cultural traditions across generations of enslavement, but the conditions made this dangerous. Get caught passing down Messenian stories? That's showing dangerous spirit. That's how you become a Krypteia target. The psychological weight of knowing your people had been free, that your enslavement resulted from military defeat rather, that inherent status made it particularly unbearable. Freedom wasn't a distant dream, it was a remembered reality that had been taken away. During the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, Sparta captured numerous cities. After the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BCE, the defeated population was dispersed. Women of childbearing age were separated from children and marched to Sparta. Ancient sources describe the screams as mothers were torn from their children, held back as their sons and daughters cried for them. These women entered the system I've described. Some became Helots, others were assigned as wives, their original families destroyed, their children lost, their identities erased. Plutarch describes how captured Athenian women from prominent families were sometimes used for political manipulation, held for months or years, experiencing treatment designed to humiliate their families, then returned only after Sparta extracted maximum political advantage. When Thebes defeated Sparta at Leuctra in 371 BCE, a major upset ending Spartan dominance, Thebans reportedly treated captured Spartan women with particular harshness. Using the same methods Sparta had employed against others, ancient sources describe it as reversal of fortune, the formerly dominant Spartans experiencing what they'd inflicted for centuries. Spartans justified everything through ideology and religion. They believed their military dominance was divinely ordained. The gods had made them superior and given them the right to rule inferior populations. Spartan mythology included divine ancestors, divine favour. When they enslaved Messenians or captured women from other cities, these weren't atrocities. They were proper ordering of the world according to divine plan. This religious framing made brutal practices seem righteous. A Spartan forcing himself on a Helot woman wasn't committing a crime. He was exercising God-given rights. A forced marriage wasn't cruelty. It was accepting duty to absorb defeated enemies. But here's the irony. The system that built Spartan power contained its own destruction. The Helot system required constant military vigilance. Spartans couldn't commit full forces to distant campaigns without risking Helot rebellion. This limited